Don't forget, you can reach the latest episode of Potomac Watch anytime. Just ask your smart speaker, play the Opinion Potomac Watch podcast.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome back. Speaking of Vivek Ramaswamy, part of what got him some attention and some attacks at that first debate was his foreign policy views, which have gotten him, even in the days since, some hard questions. Here he is explaining more of his view on what the U.S. should do vis-a-vis Russia.
I would do a deal that Putin would say yes to, but that actually advances American interests so that the United States wins. Here's what I would do. I would freeze the current lines of control. I would further make a hard commitment that NATO will not admit Ukraine to NATO. That's enough to get Putin to do the deal. But I will require something even greater in return. Russia has to exit its military alliance with China. Right now, we're pushing Russia further into China's hands. The Russia-China military alliance is the single greatest threat that the United States faces today. And so just as Nixon did it in 1972, I'll do it in reverse. Pull Russia apart from China. And by the way, get Russia to also remove its military presence in the Western Hemisphere.
Kate, my reaction to that is, why would Vladimir Putin not shake the hand and smile and take the deal and then deliver none of what Vivek Ramaswamy says he is going to get out of this deal with Putin? And let's talk also about Taiwan, because his views on that have gotten some attention. The Journal has a recent editorial on this, suggesting that he is now trying to subtly shift his stance on Taiwan. And so what's the argument there?
Yeah, so I think what Ramaswamy is capitalizing on Ukraine is the GOP bases kind of latent frustration with President Biden, who has not really been making a case for what America is trying to accomplish in Ukraine. If Biden's goal is to evict the Russians from the roughly 20% of the country that they're occupying, he's not doing enough. And if his goal is a settlement, well, he's not saying that. He's not really saying anything. And a lot of Americans are wondering what the case is. But that doesn't mean, for instance, that there is no case for supporting Ukraine, which is basically what Ramaswamy is basically taking this opening to say that there's really no point to America being in Ukraine and that he is going to strike this magical deal with Putin and somehow extract him from his alliance with Xi Jinping. Now, I think one of the key things here is that his view of this alliance, this partnership, this no limits partnership that Russia and China have formed, he seems to not understand that it's motivated by a shared ideology and a shared challenge to the West. That's why they're working together. And this idea that Putin is just going to walk away from that, or that he'd accept these borders that Vivek says he's going to enforce, or that he would withdraw any presence from our own area. I mean, these are just things that we're just supposed to believe with no explanation of how it would work. I do think the Taiwan portion is perhaps even more important, because what Vivek was originally saying was that we will defend Taiwan until 2028, when we have more domestic semiconductor production at home. And then at that point, Taiwan can fend for itself. It's a nationalistic, unfinished business. It's somebody else's problem. And I'm not going to send our sons and daughters to die for that cause. That's what he said to Hugh Hewitt. That's what he said at the Nixon Library. But he has since walked that back and said that what he wants to do is instead, in 2028, just go back to strategic ambiguity. What strategic ambiguity is our current posture, which is that we don't say whether we would intervene on Taiwan's behalf. But it's still a very narrow case of why anyone should care about Taiwan, just semiconductors. And I don't think it's worked. I think that's part of why you see him backtracking, is because I think even Americans who are perhaps skeptical of foreign involvement understand that it's really not just semiconductors that the U.S. has at stake. And that's not really the threat that the Chinese Communist Party presents to the country. So I think it's an opportunity for other candidates and those who understand that the case for U.S. friendship with Taiwan is rooted in, one, the nature and the ambitions of the Communist Party and its regime, but also our allies in the region, our support for democratic nations in Asia, and also just how much credibility we have on the line. The U.S. has for years said we oppose any kind of aggression to resolve this dispute across the strait. So we have a huge credibility tied up with whatever happens in Taiwan. So a long way of saying he definitely is trying to walk back his current posture, because even in today's Republican Party, I'm not sure that it works for him.
And maybe that's a good sign that there is some traditional Reaganite conservatism left in the Republican Party if Vivek Ramaswamy is getting enough pushback that he feels the need to sort of hedge his positions base there. Bill, this would be the flip side of the DeSantis argument about whether this Republican primary process is selecting for what we want in a president. He's a very good speaker, seems to have an answer for everything, and he takes basically any media hit that he can get. Recently, he was tweeting his appearance on TMZ Live, talking about climate change. Also, he takes these bold positions that will attract some attention, talking in recent days about how he will pardon Julian Assange on his first day in office. And so, Bill, I mean, it seems to be working for him so far. He has been rising in the polls, getting all sorts of attention he wasn't even 2 or 3 months ago. But maybe that strategy doesn't go the distance.
Every 4 years, different people have moments during primaries when they give a good answer or they surge for some reason. I don't think it's sustainable. I do think it's a service because what we saw in the debate when he spoke is that Nikki Haley came back at him very forcefully, very substantively. And I think that's a good debate to have. And I was persuaded by her position. So I don't know about his surging. I think he's still under 5% in the Real Clear Politics average. We'll see if he goes further. He obviously thinks he's appealing to younger voters and out trumping Trump, kind of complaining about endless wars. But, you made a reference to Reaganism. People forget that the Cold War, Reagan really won that without using U.S. troops that much. He armed our friends and Contras. He armed the Afghans. And a lot of them did the work. He made some mistakes. He went into Lebanon. The troops got blown up. He withdrew. But most of the time, he was allied with our friends, the missiles. And I think it's really appalling to have these kind of lines toward Ukraine and Taiwan. We're talking about people's destiny as a nation. And we're willing to gamble it or just treat it like a bargaining chip. Who's going to believe us if that's our attitude? We'll defend Taiwan for a few years until we can get by in semiconductors. Look, and part of the problem is Biden doesn't have a policy. His policy, I think, on Ukraine was dictated by catastrophe that was his fault entirely in Afghanistan. When we left people behind, we left weapons behind, we went out and abandoned these people. And I think Joe Biden realized I couldn't have another country fall under my watch so soon. So he's given Ukraine enough to stay in the game, but not enough to prevail. And we don't know whether he wants them to prevail. He never says that. It's inconceivable to me as a former speechwriter that Joe Biden has not once given a primetime address on Ukraine, why we're there, and what we hope the goals are. And it's up to Republicans to fill the void. And it should be easy.
But it does seem to me that the Republican field is still pretty split among non-Trump candidates. And if someone is going to emerge to give a direct head-to-head challenge to Donald Trump, who's still running above 50% in national polling averages, would certainly help if some of these lesser candidates decided to drop out. And so I'll give a nod to Francis Suarez, the mayor of Miami, 45 years old, who is the first Republican to suspend his campaign this week. Here is a piece of what he said. It was a privilege to come so close to appearing on stage. I had looked forward to sharing the story of Miami, America's most successful city, especially at a time when so many cities are plagued with poverty, unemployment, high taxes, violent crime, and homelessness. And the reference to the stage there is that Mr. Suarez did not make the Republican requirements to appear at that first debate in Milwaukee, which may be why some listeners are thinking, who is Francis Suarez? I did not know he was even running for president. But there are all sorts of candidates who continue their campaigns long after it becomes clear they are not going to be the winner. They're not going to emerge. They're not going to catch fire and strike lightning. Some of it, I think, is because they've asked donors to give money, and it's hard not to run through the tape. Some of it is because they've invested their own money. Some of it is because it's more fun running for president than it is being the mayor of Miami, as lovely as Miami is. And so, Kate, to me, this is the right move here by Francis Suarez, getting out while there's still time, setting an example for other candidates who are polling a little bit higher, and maybe candidates who don't make that second debate stage, since the criteria to appear are only going to ratchet up.
Yeah, I mean, the question you're asking is how do we make it catch on? And I think he deserves credit too for a classy exit and for bowing out and having the awareness to do so when it was obvious he was just not going to break through. To your point about why politicians stay in longer than they should, I mean, another one is that they're in sort of an intellectually protected environment where people are telling them they should stay in or they really do have a chance. And it gets easy to start to drink that water. And so credit to him for realizing reality as soon as he could. Because of course, everybody points back to 2016 when a divided field and John Kasich and others just lingered way too long in the race and nobody really was able to give Trump a direct challenge. I do think the flip side of hoping more people drop out and relying on politicians to be self-aware, which is not always in the offering, would be for somebody else to really break through. And so you need somebody to start to surge. And now we've been talking a lot about Reagan on this podcast and others and what parts of his agenda they might take up. But having somebody who can present a credible, optimistic campaign rooted in, economic and national revival, both at home and abroad, if somebody can press that message, and we've seen a couple people start to try. We would want, for instance, DeSantis to talk a little bit less about some of those divisive issues we've discussed. We want Tim Scott to lay out some specific policy proposals. I mean, there is still room for that to happen. And I think that is the other route to hopefully getting a direct challenger.
Thank you, Bill and Kate. Thank you all for listening. You can email us at pwpodcast@wsj.com. If you like the show, please hit that subscribe button, and we'll be back next week with another edition of Potomac Watch.